Okay. Well, good evening, residents. While we work through a technical issue or two, this is the City of Everett City Council's Built Environment Council Committee, a subcommittee where issues come in many cases to a subset of the City Council before they go to the full council. This is our meeting for December 11th, 2024. We're here in the Everett City Council chambers. The public is welcome to attend our meetings here, the subcommittee meetings, along with the regular council meetings here or online. Also, these meetings are available afterwards on YouTube on the City of Everett's website. We welcome the public here, but don't take comments here during our subcommittee meetings, though those comments are all welcome during our regular council meetings. The Built Environment Committee this evening has one main agenda item, and that is the Everett 2044 Comprehensive Plan and Development Regulations Periodic Update. The topic for tonight is a briefing from our staff, and I will hand it over to our Planning Director for the City of Everett, Yorick Stevens-Wajda.
Thank you, Chair Zarlingo, members of the committee. I'm Yorick Stevens-Wajda, Planning Director. As mentioned, with me, Alice-Ann Wetzel, our Long Range Planning Manager and Project Manager for this Everett 2044 Comprehensive Plan and Development Regulation Periodic Update, is why we made up Everett 2044, because it's shorter than all of that. It's been a little while since we've touched base with the council. I want to give you a progress update, talk a little bit about what we've accomplished so far in the project, which I think you'll see is quite a bit. We've been keeping the Planning Commission and staff extremely busy over the last year and then a couple of years before that. Want to orient you a little bit to some draft materials that are available and for your review. It doesn't have to be time for council review now, but we welcome your input and comments at any time. And those are also available for public consumption, and then talk a little bit about what's coming next. We have two documents that we've brought here. One of them is an outline of the comprehensive plan. It goes element by element with some aspects of the development regulations in the urban form part. And we can talk through a couple of the key topics that have come up in each one of those elements and where we're at with each one of them. And then we have the draft land use map, which goes in the comprehensive plan that's on one side of the paper, and the draft zoning map, which implements the comprehensive plan map and the rest of the comprehensive plan and its policies, and is part of the development regulations. The maps are available on everettwa.gov/2044. We just refreshed that website over the last week, and so all of these documents, these drafts, are available on that website. And then the Planning Commission webpage and their materials is the other great place to go for documents that are in progress. So where we're at now, we have a complete draft of a lot of the really core parts of the comprehensive plan, especially on the land use side. We've got the zoning map, which says what you can build and where, which is based on the more general comprehensive plan map. For each of the elements, we are working through goals, policies, and actions as the core of that element. Other than the goals, policies, and actions, there's text that describes and gives context for each of those. It's a little bit less impactful in terms of actually driving policy than the numbered goals, policies, and actions. So we're focusing on those first, and then we'll build the element around those. For each of the goals, policies, and actions, we're starting with a goal alignment sheet, and that takes the regional goals and policies and state law that has already been decided and influences our planning, and we line it up with our existing goals and policies, and then on the far right column for each one of these are the proposed goals. Goals are end states, where we're going, where we hope to be, and a description of what we'd like to see in that particular area at the end of the planning period in 2044. The policies are how we get there. Actions are discrete work products. You know when you've started it, you know when you've finished it, and they are focused on the first 5 years of the comprehensive plan. So we have the goal alignment sheets and the goals, policies, and actions for about half of the elements, and I would put transportation element as a pretty high-profile one that is drafted at a staff level, and we'll be bringing that to the Transportation Advisory Committee. Is that next week, I believe?
Yeah, and then 19th.
19th?
Special meeting, because there's not usually a TAC meeting in
Yes.
December. So.
Yes, exactly. This was important enough for that. And then we'll bring it to the Planning Commission as well in January. So that's a major element, I would say. And that would round out, I think, the most complicated and impactful elements, not to discount the other ones, they're important too, but urban form, design and development, housing, transportation, I think are really key here. So there are links to those in this, and this was emailed to you yesterday, so you have the ability to get to it from your computers, and we'll post this memo online as well, and then all these materials are available on everett.gov/2044. So we propose walking through this document a little bit, talking about each element, where we're at, and a couple of the supporting materials other than those goals and policies and goal alignments, where some of the key changes and key topics of discussion and focus are with each one of the elements. And then happy to take any questions. Feel free to interrupt along the way, or if there's anything that's kind of burning on your mind that you even wanted to start with, we would be happy to take that on too. Okay. In this outline, this includes a scope and a vision statement for each element. Won't read those. You've got them there. For urban form, the difference between urban form and design and development is the level, macro, zoning map, land use map, what's allowed where at a gross scale is in urban form. Design and development is usually at the site level. Architecture, site plan, look and feel of a development is the distinction there. So urban form, this is based on the alternatives analysis that we've been talking about for a couple of years. Alternatives to no action, and then alternative 2, concentrated, and alternative 3. I think we've mentioned that we've been moving forward and advancing alternative 3. That's the zoning map that you see and the comprehensive plan map that you see are both based on alternative 3, and they are very similar. There's been a couple of places where we've made some changes. We anticipate that there will be site-specific or even neighborhood scale amendments proposed, requested, made to that. We are at a staff level and with the Planning Commission doing things on a more standardized level. We had the geographies, you'll remember from the alternatives, the urban corridors, the corridor frames, the connectors, metro frame, and neighborhood residential. So those were standard ways of applying changes to what we have in the current zoning map, and we've stuck closely to that. A couple of, yes.
Question. Metro Everett is on this map. Is the urban form, would that have policies like the no services, social services on the ground floor in Metro Everett, or is that in a different area? I know it's gone through a little bit by Planning Commission and it's been mentioned here, but I'm just curious if that is part of urban form or if it's a different place.
It'd be more in design and development because it's very site-specific. Urban form is the gross look of downtown, that it's commercial mixed use, it's high-rise, it's not what the specific uses are, although urban form does go into the zoning code and does have some of the uses, but the actual regulations would fall into more design and development.
Okay, thank you.
Probably worth checking both for a lot of these things because there's a lot of interrelationship there. We don't have a specific policy that I can remember about ground floor uses. It's going to be general focus on active uses and things that influence that decision, but we do not have like a do not site clinics on the ground floor downtown.
I completely disagree with you, but I don't have it written down, but I know we've talked about it. So
It's in
let's bring
code.
that back.
It's in code.
It's in code. It's in the development
Yeah.
regulations, yes.
So what's the difference?
The policies guide the development regulations. They can be specific or they can be general. So here's a goal.
Maybe
in
I don't completely disagree, but it's definitely in code.
It is still in code and it's not changing.
So we have a goal, for instance, in urban form, Metro Everett is carefully designed, attractive, bustling, and diverse metropolitan center that attracts a wide variety of businesses, services, housing, civic and cultural institutions, and people. That's at the highest level. Hopefully that's if that's on the right track for what we're looking for Metro Everett. And then there would be policies to implement that get close to this issue. The comprehensive plan is harder to change than the development regulations. Not much harder, it's legislative, it can be done once per year by the council. It's just a little bit more of a thoughtful process that goes into it. So we want to balance that flexibility to be able to change the specifics of the regulation over time while keeping a steady course on some of the things that take a long time to implement. So do keep an eye out for the wording associated with, I know that's a topic that you're interested in, keep an eye out for the wording. Some of it is going to be kind of,
So if we went to the policy level, or if it was the policy level right now, we would not have been able to do the birth center. We would have had to change the comp plan, which we couldn't do right now, but we could change the code. So.
Understood. Thank you.
So it's a nuance, but it's an important one.
I guess one other thing that probably makes sense to raise at the beginning of this discussion is this comp plan is also informed by and driven by substantially state efforts from laws passed a couple of years ago, most of them. And so that state level effort directed us to, in our next comprehensive plan review and update, to implement a bunch of those changes, and then we're doing that compatible with those things. So, and that may be a source of some other discussions in terms of what kinds of things we have freedom to do and which kinds of things are mandated by state law.
Absolutely.
absolutely. Yeah, there's the very specific state laws like middle housing. You must allow middle housing on 75% of the parcels in the city. There is growth targets that are numeric. Then there are Growth Management Act goals, provide sufficient housing affordable to all economic segments, and there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. There's every topic under the sun is captured in here, but yeah, thank you for that reminder. The goal alignment sheet is a great place to see the policies that have kind of are above the city, I guess, regional and state policies that feed into this work that we must be consistent with, and then we apply our discretion within those kind of guardrails. So the maps, alternative 3 is the basis for it. Not many changes from what you have seen in the past year or two on alternative 3. Two notable ones are Metro Everett. I think in Metro Everett we had it from end to end as high-rise, which was a little simplistic. There are kind of a wedding cake kind of tiers of heights in Metro Everett now that go all the way from 3 or 4 floors on the outside edges of Metro Everett up to, I think we're at 12 to 25 floors in the core of downtown. We did not have that really reflected in the alternative maps, and we have kind of corrected that. So in the zoning map that you'll see a very similar wedding cake kind of a tiered approach to Metro Everett. Much more similar to what we have now than what was in alternative 3. So that's one. I think historic overlays, we have collapsed we have a height limit at every half number interval from right now in our code from 3 stories up to 25 stories. There's 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5. There's a parcel somewhere that has almost every single one of those numbers. We're simplifying and proposing to no longer have a separate height map than a zoning map, and so we're simplifying to what is more common in cities around the region and the country, which is to have the zone have both the height and what's allowed in it. We used the low-rise, mid-rise, high-rise from the alternative 3, and the low-rise is 4 stories, mid-rise 7 stories, high-rise 15, except 25 in Metro. Those zone names now, the number equals the number of floors, whereas currently we have UR4, but that is anywhere from 3 stories up to 12 stories in different parts. Now UR4 means urban residential 4 floors, urban residential 7 floors. MU is mixed use. The comprehensive plan map differentiates, the pink mixed use means more or less full range of commercial uses are allowed as well as residential. And then the yellow is mostly just residential. Different heights and scales within that, but the uses are differentiated. So if you wanted to build a significant commercial development in what is yellow on the comprehensive plan map, you would have to do a map change to do that. If the residential is 4 floors and you wanted to rezone to 7, you can do that within the zoning map without changing the comprehensive plan. So that's how those relationships work and how the zone names and numbers mean. Yes.
It was sounding really neat that like UR 7 and UR 8 would directly correlate to how tall a building can be. Would it make it more difficult to change then? Okay, so.
If you
Okay.
wanted to go from UR 4, which is urban residential 4 floors, to UR 7, that would be a rezone, and you could do that any time of year associated with a proposal or just as a legislative change. We could, I believe, create a UR 6 or 8 if we wanted to as well, and it would just add a column in the zoning use matrix and some regulations for it, so we're not locked into those numbers or those zones.
Okay, so it's not changing the comp plan, just the map, even though they're melding together.
Yes, yes. We have the parts that we've focused on in this plan update are still housing first, less changes on the commercial and the mixed use side. We had to make some calls for where we're at with the zoning, and so there are a few changes that are in the use table. That is what says what is allowed in what places, including the ground floor clinics and all those reference notes, and where do you allow auto dismantling and recycling, where do you allow retail sales and services, and where do you allow hospitals and those sorts of things. So that's all available. It's still a work in progress. We brought it to the Planning Commission as a first draft. We got their comments, and we'll be working on it as staff, so don't consider that to be a final draft yet. But it's instructive, and again, we welcome any comments. Historic overlays, there are some historic overlays that have 3 or 3.5 story zoning now, and when we simplified the zone structure, that went up to 4. In discussions with the Historic Commission, that was a significant change to the potential for redevelopment and impacts to historic resources, so we're bringing that back to where it is now, 3 or 3.5 floors, I think, 3. And I'm walking through the changes in key topics in urban form right now. Middle housing, we've talked a lot about that. We're have done some work with the Planning Commission in May, June, and we're bringing back middle housing regulations next week with them to take the next step in what are the details on what will be in middle housing, heights and setbacks and lot coverage and parking and open space and other topics like that. We have to do middle housing, but there's discretion on how we do it. We have added, and this is new since the alternatives, neighborhood residential constrained. You see that in the zoning map.
It's not on this map, it's on that one, unfortunately.
Oh, I may have grabbed an earlier version.
So what we did was what we did was we looked at the residential areas in the city that were limited by access and were adjacent to steep slopes, and in the event of an emergency would have limited capability of leaving. So those streets were more than 750 feet in length, and they only had one entrance. And they were primarily, we had Valley View, because that all is constrained with one entrance. We had some areas in the Bluffs area adjacent to the ravines where you have the potential for urban wildland fires because of the woods. And these all have one entrance. So what we are saying is that these areas with the hatching over them, and we do have access to this map, and I don't know whether it's on the link or not, but we can send it to you, that says these will not be open for middle housing. They will still stay as primarily single-family residential. They can add an ADU, but they will not be open for middle housing for higher density. If, in the event, they figure out a way to get a second entrance, it can then open up. But until then, it is what we are calling constrained and not doing it. And the Valley View neighborhood started this conversation because of the steep slopes, the limited access, their water issues, and said, wait a minute, we really can't afford this. And so then we started looking at what other areas of the city might be having similar issues, and that's where we came up with them. So it's here, there's one here, and then there's some across here because of the terrain primarily and the development pattern.
The ADU limits on that would be the same as the rest?
The ADU limits would stay,
Would stay the
yes.
same? Okay. That is the same as they're going to be, not the same as they have been in the past?
The same as they are
right now. Oh, so those will be ADU that will not be affected by the other ADU changes then? They'll stay in the, okay.
I heard hatch marks, I see the hatch marks, I'm not, oh, I found it, NRC.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I just found it myself.
So it's here, 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 there, and then there's one down
Is that
here.
one the new apartments?
This?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, that's
The new
just
apartments are right here.
Oh, yeah, four corners, yeah.
Yeah, okay, just curious.
Yeah, no, this is a weird street that comes in, does a circle and leaves. Barbara Lane or something?
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it's totally, I think what happened was at some point it might have gone through, but then the highway.
Yep. I know where that, okay, yeah. While we're looking at maps, and you had mentioned historic overlay, I just realized recently that there's a difference between historic overlay and historic district. Is that represented on any of these maps? Does it? I know it matters sometimes, because that's why.
It is, there is a nuanced difference. So in a historic overlay, all exterior improvements for new construction or whatever have to come to the Historic Commission. In a designated National Register Historic District under the code, only demolitions come in. They are supposed to adhere to the Secretary of Interior standards, but they do not come in for permits. And the Secretary of Interior standards technically only apply to buildings when you're using federal funds.
I know those technicalities from previous things in historic districts. Thank you.
Thank you for that. My apologies for grabbing, I think this is the October 15th version, not the October 31st version. And I think there's someone on the 8th floor still. I asked them, they may bring down the right set of maps. We'll see. So neighborhood residential constrained, that's an important one. Centers. Centers, we have Metro Everett, we have the Southwest Everett Regional Growth Center. Part of, yeah, they're part of the countywide planning policies and regional policy is to designate countywide centers and local centers if we'd like. So we should or must or should strongly should designate countywide centers. Local centers are optional. But they're a great planning framework for bringing in public investment, special design standards, incentives where we have them all together to make a place that can have some synergy to it. Allison.
There are more.
And Pipa
Okay.
says you can leave it on the table if you
Okay,
would like.
that works,
and we
thank
can
you.
still
That
hear.
makes it easier to
Yeah.
be Vanna. So what we did was we looked at where we have concentrations of places that the community would go to places to eat, places to get food, like grocery stores, places for different services or whatever. And so we put them all on a map, and we got this lovely colorful dots. And the concentrations of those dots were where we are calling, what we are calling community hubs. Community hubs are our bigger centers. So there's one at the university and the hospitals. There's one down here at the proposed light rail station. And then the county is putting one down here at the other light rail station. So since we have a quarter of the pizza, we are basically accepting their decision. So then our secondary gathering places, what we are calling our neighborhood nodes, which would be smaller places that would still get concentrations of growth. And so that's Silver Lake, we're putting the mall there, and the reason we put the mall in neighborhood nodes is because the owner of the mall does residential development and commercial development. They don't do mixed-use development. And so we would see a community hub, as being a mixed-use center. Evidently, part of the site that is owned by Floor & Decor is interested in mixed use, but that's still TBD. So what we are saying is, and all of these are on bus rapid transit stops, are what we are calling neighborhood nodes, to get more concentrations of localized uses, potentially using the land for small commercial and residential in those locations. So that's the locations that we have chosen at this point. We are open to other sites if needed, but we thought we would start with our major ones at this point in time, and we can add as we move forward. Yes,
Is Metro Everett already a node?
that's already a center.
I mean,
And Southwest Industrial Park is already an industrial center. But this is more for our mixed uses. We're commenting on new versions by calling it community hubs and neighborhood nodes, and trying to get energy and synergy in those locations.
To understand a little better, I guess I'm thinking about an area here that I'm more familiar with. In terms of intensity of use, this is probably a little farther to the south here. Is it probably higher intensity but not mixed use? Is that the reason for this being located here rather than?
That's an idea. That's not the boundary.
Oh, okay, so it's meant to be
It's meant to give you an idea that somewhere in here.
Yeah.
I mean, our boundaries will never be circular. They'll take into effect, I mean, even if you just went with the universities, they would take into all of
Yeah,
their
and I see
land.
looking at this now that the size of these circles is all fixed, so the size of it is not indicating.
Yes, exactly. So the size for the community hubs are all the same. The size for the neighborhood nodes are smaller and a different color. And that's just to give you an idea as to where they are. We're
And the
not,
com- And the community hubs were the ones that were on the bus rapid transit or the
Yes.
Swift lines, the neighborhood centers not.
not necessarily. So it gives people, especially for this one over here on Mukilteo Boulevard, it already is a bit of a community neighborhood node. And we are building on existing projects. We're not creating something out of whole cloth. So what we're doing is saying, okay, this already has a concentration of uses, but can we make it better and make it more accessible to the properties on either side? Can we connect? Can we make it more walkable? Can we make it more of a destination? So that's the goal of that. In a community hub, the minimum height will be 4 stories. In a neighborhood node, it would be 3. Anything on that one?
Also, something that another location that's fairly intensely developed and is on bus rapid transit line is here, that center anchored by Fred Meyer on 132nd. Does that interact with these kinds of centers at all?
It could in the future. It just, I mean, that's strictly commercial. We're looking at places that we can optimize for more mixed use. But that doesn't mean that Fred Meyer might not in the future. I mean, Costco is already building a mixed-use development in LA, so.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that doesn't preclude anything. It's just sort of saying, this is what we are gearing towards, and these are our places at this point. And it's a 20-year plan, and so in 5 years, if something changes dramatically, or even in 3 years, if somebody comes in with a bunch of land and plan, we're open for conversation.
Well, and our residents and developers will be more familiar with this too.
Yes,
As
by
an
then.
implemented rather than a new idea.
Do you want me to do the next one? The commercial?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so the next thing on the list here, but after centers, is what we are calling neighborhood commercial. Right now, we have what are, is it neighborhood NB districts? NB districts. So we went and looked at all the NB districts across the city, and most of them are on the edges of neighborhoods or on collector streets that don't have much of an impact, and they were sort of, and if we once we started looking at it, they weren't necessarily neighborhood businesses. We have such wonderful things as tow trucks and bait shops on one of our neighborhood businesses. We have pizza shops, we have law firms and realtors on another. We have laundromats, not necessarily things that relate to the neighborhood, they just happen to be adjacent to it. Or we have houses, I mean, in them, and some, it's just, St. Vincent de Paul, the entire block of St. Vincent de Paul is a neighborhood business district
On Broadway?
on Broadway. But the west side of St. Vincent de Paul and every property west of it is all residential. But it's all zone neighborhood business. And it's like, why? And it's on narrow streets, and it's just, you sort of look at it and went, I don't know what the planning was. But anyway, so what we are proposing is those will all be either permitted by the new zoning or grandfathered in. What we are proposing is to have floating commercial options within our residential districts. These can be located on corners or in existing historic buildings that were commercial buildings. So they might have been a market, they might have been a cafe, they might have been something. They have to be on corners if they're going new. They can be no greater than 3,000 square feet. So if you're on a corner lot and you want to put in a neighborhood market, you can put in a 3,000 square foot market. You can put in 2 stories of residential or 3 stories of residential above it, and you can serve the neighborhood. And there's a specific list of businesses that can be used in that district. So they can be cafes, they can be bakeries, they can be neighborhood markets, they can be barbers and beauty salons, and they would serve the neighborhood. So the goal is that somebody could walk to that area and use those services without having to get into a car and drive someplace else. Parking would be either on the rear or the side. They could not create a 7-Eleven because there is no parking on the front. The front setback would be 3 to 5 feet from the sidewalk, max. And they would be able to then have it as a community resource for the future. Right now, most of our historic buildings that were commercial properties are either turned into residential or are non-conforming or just vacant or cause problems. There are some that are in middle of blocks. Those would be able to be turned back into commercial uses. But those are primarily all in the northern part of the city. We don't have much in walkable commercial in the adjacent to neighborhoods in the south end of the city. So this would give us an opportunity for people to be able to walk to the corner store to pick up milk, bread, whatever. Will it happen? I don't know, but it gives the opportunity for that use to occur in a smaller area. Right now, what statistics tell us is that they need about 1,000 people within half a mile. Whether that is then feasible in the southern end of the city, not. But we have lots of places in the southern end of the city that are food deserts, and this would give us the opportunity to create places for people to get potentially affordable food close to home.
If it has to be on a corner, we don't have a whole lot of corners.
2 streets,
south.
2 streets, intersection of 2 streets would count as a corner.
All right.
Whether it is a 45-degree angle, I'm not going to go there.
And then I guess kind of related, it sounds like the intent is that for the most part, even though residential density might be increased in some of those cases, if you put a couple of floors of residential on top of one of these things, you would not be expecting to increase residential numbers enough and cars enough to need specific additional parking?
Correct. We are not putting in a parking requirement.
It would be along the same lines as what you would otherwise do in the neighborhood residential zone. So the ultimate height and the other required design requirements and everything would be neighborhood residential. There's a memo linked in here and available on all this specific for the neighborhood commercial for the details. I don't know if you mentioned like the open hours too. There are limitations.
Yeah,
so-
the hours would be like 7 to 10 or something, 7 to 11, I can't remember.
So all designed to really focus on what is daily needs for folks in that neighborhood and not regional and things. I think the Planning Commission was debating offices. That's an example of something that's not really like neighborhood serving, but maybe with trends in employment, that was something of interest and definitely not a big impact on neighbors. So if you see other things that could be of concern, we'd like to
Sure, Liz.
I keep getting 7-Eleven stuck in my head, and now 7 to 10, and then I was thinking Boeing, and folks that work not 9 to 5 do need businesses not between the hours of 7 and 10 possibly, because shift, shift work. So I just want to put that out there. I haven't solidified that thought, but it is a thought, and it's valid.
I hear you. What we were putting in was that it would have limited impact on adjacent properties. So that was primarily the reason for it. What was the one that Commissioner Ryan was talking about, the pizza place and the opportunity for more of those? I can't remember what the name of it is. Chippies or? Zippies. Okay, I was close. So the opportunity to have something close to home that you can walk to and go to, and that kind of thing. So.
Okay, that's almost through the first one, which is the biggest one, I think. I know that is the biggest one. Critical area regulations, state mandate update to our critical areas code, that is wetland, stream, steep slopes, protections, and safety standards. We will be picking that up. Some of it potentially as part of this periodic update, some of it after. It's going to be taking the best available science and state requirements and applying them to city regulations. We've heard from the Department of Fish and Wildlife that our stream buffers are a little bit light. I want to say we have 75 and the best available science now is 100 feet. So that's an example of where we will potentially be looking at that. And then they're also looking at our exceptions criteria in code as well as our administration of those exceptions. Much of that work, I think I have grants on here somewhere.
That's in housing.
That's in housing. We do have a grant from the Department of Ecology to help with those critical area regulation updates with a focus on salmon recovery. Okay, that is urban form, and you can see the 6, 7, 8, 9, so about 9 meetings that we've brought the Planning Commission through. So 9 times 2 at least, there's 25 hours worth of discussion with the Planning Commission and great advice for them for anyone who has the interest to dive deep into that. But it's been very productive conversation. I think we're getting pretty close. Design and development is the more site-specific that gets into the design of the development. Alisan mentioned minimum heights in centers. We currently have minimum height requirements on TOD streets, TOD designated streets, transit-oriented development designated streets, and I believe in the MU zone. So we're looking at where and at what level to apply those minimum heights. We also have a minimum residential development standard currently in the UR3 zone of 2 units per development, and in the UR4 zone is 3 units per development. So that's something that we're looking at, what zones that is appropriate to map to on that.
is it safe for me to start thinking that whenever you have a number after UR, that it's that high?
Yes, in the new one. Yeah, that's a tough one, because we have UR4 and UR4, so
Yeah.
I will try to say UR4 floor anytime I'm talking about the new zones.
And then with respect to floors, something that comes up periodically is floors versus feet.
Yes.
And how do you interpret those? And some of those things, if there's a minimum height of 2 stories, would that still work with a single thing if it was something that needed extra height? How are we flexible in that? And how do we interpret the floors?
We were discussing that today as far as residential, and we were discussing
Neighborhood residential.
We were discussing between 7 and 10 feet for the floor height. So approximately, you could go as low as 7, but, you know, if we're talking UR4, it would be 40 feet. And so that would be approximately where we are. But there would be an associated height with the UR4. So if you decided to go 4 7-stories, you could be a little bit lower, but you're still, your maximum would be 40 or 42 or whatever it's going to be.
And so the limit would, so could you add, if you did all 7s, could you add an extra floor then, effectively?
I think we were talking, and this, we go back and forth. Right now, we have both in code. We're trying, our goal is to simplify it for both the architects and for our staff. As of today, we would call it UR7 floors so that people know what it means, but the height will be expressed in feet. And then I guess if you had short floors and you squeeze in an extra floor, that you're able to do that, but it's unlikely. We want the number of feet to allow for the mechanical equipment and new merging technologies like modular that's a little bit taller because they have to fit more ventilation and tubes and pipes and stuff in between the ceiling and the floor.
I'm thinking about it partly from the standpoint of just communicating it to our community members so that they kind of understand if they hear something, they see a zoning or they see a plan, they have a way to interpret that and anticipate what's coming, and we get better feedback in terms of, we and you would get better feedback in terms of choices.
For mixed use, for the ground floor, the planning commission was recommending that we do 16 to 20 feet because that gives, even if it's not used for commercial at the time, you can loft it and still keep it residential or a use, but most major retailers or people that are doing it want a 20-foot space. And so that was what we were talking about for ground floor in the mixed use.
Okay.
For
So,
middle housing, it's so much land, it's worth mentioning where we're at on that. The planning commission, we have a 28-foot limit in the single-family zones currently. Planning commission is not often unanimous. They were unanimous at wanting 3 full floors allowed, and that in feet could be 35. There's different ways to do it, and do you want to encourage sloped roofs or prohibit or require and that sort of thing that connects floors to height. The state model ordinance and their codes are at around 35 feet, depending on the building type. So that's where we're at now on neighborhood residential. 3 full floors, allowance for a sloped roof that could be 35 feet. I know
Okay,
that
so
that-
in terms of community feedback, that's a way to look, way to look at that, and that would be another 7 feet or so from what has been for decades, the 28-foot limit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just have to say, I keep thinking of being John Malkovich, and they've got the 12 and a half floor, so I'm wondering if half, and then you said if you scrunch them all down, could they get an extra floor? Are half floors really allowed?
No, building code, it's 8 feet, I think, is the minimum, because there are some basketball players or just tall people. So yeah, there's practical limits. Where it gets more interesting is on like sloped sites, or if you're a half floor underground or a pitched roof with dormers, and then that's a half floor. So that's where there are half floors, but they're not short, they're angled in some way. Okay. Parking, I have to mention parking here. There's some state requirements around that. Parking is limited to one stall per unit in the neighborhood residential in the middle housing, as long as the lot is under 6,000 square feet. There are some other parking related laws that came online recently, and I've heard the legislature is looking at that again this year. We're looking at parking with neighborhood residential at potentially one per unit that would meet the state law. We are looking at either using the multifamily parking standards or the Metro Everett parking standards, or one per unit for residential development otherwise in the city. And then we're looking at potentially low or no parking requirement in centers being the most significant incentive that we have for development. There is no greater barrier to housing or any other kind of development than fitting and funding the parking. It is also a very popular thing to supply. So we're in the early stages of working through that, and I think we'll talk through that with the Planning Commission, probably along with the transportation element.
I guess I just want to recognize that as a really important conflict and a difficult thing to resolve, because we aren't yet mostly walkable, and people use cars to get to their jobs and their shopping and that sort of thing. And also developments that can bring in more people and cars than we have parking for them. And that's the constant thing I think we hear in working with our neighborhoods on this. So I guess all I can say is that's something I'm taking seriously. Councilmember Vader.
Also, and I'd be hard pressed, and I think all of us would be, to name a apartment complex development we've done with the current parking requirements where we haven't seen spill over into the neighborhood. And if it's already happening, it seems like to some extent, that's, to me, at least a caution in terms of where we go, so.
No, we have full caution. I will say that there's no parking maximums under discussion, and it's more about letting the market decide. If your business needs parking, you will provide it. If you want to rent your apartment, you will provide it. And for those who see their market as not having as many, and there are going to be some street parking management implications there. And some of this is in our control, some of it is not. So we are going to have to take some steps on parking, but how far we go, I think, is up to us.
I think that's the externality we have to worry about, is new developments, and then the spread, the spillover that Councilmember Bader was talking about. We'll keep looking at that.
I hear about it too. I know Public Works hear about it all the time.
I've been told, and I haven't looked it up myself, but Japan, apparently, if you're going to buy a car, you're going to also make sure that you have a place that you pay to park it.
I've heard that too.
There is no free parking on the streets or anywhere. So if you get a car, you also need to buy a space. So I don't think we're there yet.
So in places like centers, I think you would expect to have parking management, and if there is, downtown Everett, for instance, if you don't have a parking space, you cannot I guess you can go down to 38th maybe. I'm not going to say that I know where the end of the time-limited parking is, but I believe it to be around 38th. It's an awful long walk, and less likely. So the biggest issues are where you have unlimited free street parking that is maybe hotly contested because there's a lot of developments, older housing, that don't have their own parking spot. But to me, it comes down to pretty often, if you need parking, you should have your parking, and that the street is kind of available to all. It is $50,000 to $90,000 per housing unit is the cost, times 1 or 2, double that. So appropriate caution is absolutely there, and I think we'll have some fun discussions about that.
Time check. I'm not sure if we were going to get through this entire 2 pages, front and back, but we haven't, and we have 10 minutes.
I think we could end at housing.
Oh, okay. Well then, carry on.
Housing, we've talked the most about. It was the second element, I think that we had the goals and policies and actions. I will only mention some of the, about the housing targets, 39,000, I think it was, units that we're planning for. We've got a couple of grant-funded work programs that we're taking on. One is the CLIP grant, which is an action plan for 0 to 50% area median income housing. That is a grant that we do have from Commerce with, I think, a 6-month period, so we'll hear a lot more about that in the first half of next year, and some of it may influence the comprehensive plan, and some of it may be more action-oriented that sits alongside the plan. The other one is the federal pro-housing grant that you may remember from authorizing it a couple of weeks ago. Waiting with bated breath, we should hear it any day now about that one, and that would be a real game changer, I think, for our ability to incentivize housing in the city. Displacement and inclusionary zoning is one. LISC and FutureWise have been retained by Connect Casino Road, I think is how that went, or maybe it was LISC on behalf of Connect Casino Road, but either way, there's some analytical horsepower on the job, and we've been meeting with them as they do their work. They're preparing a memo with recommendations on the comprehensive plan. I think that will come to the council here shortly, and they are going to give a presentation to the Planning Commission next week, including on some engagement that they've done in the Casino Road neighborhood and some things that they are seeing. They have been making a push for some anti-displacement efforts and for some concern, kind of raising some concerns about, we're not making many changes in the Casino Road neighborhood. We're planning on doing light rail station area planning after the comprehensive plan. But on Casino Road, for example, is a current 6-story height limit, and we have that at 7 stories. Even that 1 story and the displacement pressure that is there or is coming is of great concern to them and to us as well. Inclusionary zoning is a really challenging one that we've been wrestling with so far. We think that it's more harm than good because of the development that it prevents, and that staff think, and the research generally says, that supply is the path to affordability. There may be some areas under particular displacement strain where there may be a need to take some specific actions around that, and I think that group is going to be advocating for a designation of displacement risk and an inclusionary zoning requirement in that neighborhood. So far, I'm very tentative on that because it runs the risk of stifling development, which is the opposite of affordability, I think. So we'll hear more about that in the next week, but know that that's a significant policy question that at the end of the day may wind up in your lap. So that's probably, yeah, are there any?
I could jump in with 2 questions. So one, York, maybe could you explain how this effort integrates or fits in with Vision 2050?
Yes, it implements Vision 2050. A lot of the requirements that we're working with come out of the multi-county planning policies. The targets come from the regional growth strategy. There is, you'll find the multi-county planning policies in our guiding principles. There are also countywide planning policies, but for the most part, they all say the same thing. So it's at a regional level, that plan is our plan already. We are adding specificity to it, so I think that narrows our options somewhat.
Thanks. And then the second comment I want to make is I continue to be somewhat concerned as we look at the zoning map where we have big differences between the 2 zoning types right next to each other, especially the few places where MU15 is up against NR, but also some places where, we go from UR7 to NR, or from from MU4 up to MU15. So I just wanted to voice that concern again, that I think those are likely to be the places that as we bring this out to neighborhoods, that we're likely to hear from. And is there a way to preempt that possibly too? So,
For the most part, we wrapped all of the higher zones in lower zones. So for the most part, NR is always next to a low-rise zone, not a mid-rise or high-rise. There are a couple, and I think looking at like Everett Mall Way, for example, is one that I see MU15 next to single-family. I believe that is already MU zone next to a single-family zone. But that doesn't mean, there are also regulations in the development regulations around step downs next to certain zones that we haven't completely figured out, so there are some tools like that.
I think kind of a related thing in terms of our community members and their questions and concerns, at some point, probably a discussion, and maybe this is the committee's the place for it, about the other unincorporated Snohomish County and other communities in Snohomish County, and how what we're doing relates to them, so that the general goals of the Growth Management Act about controlling growth, allocating it, sharing the load, those kinds of things. I think that's a question that always comes up if you're a resident of Everett. At least we hear it a lot.
And on the note of engagement with the residents, we're planning a fourth maybe and final major public outreach period in January and February. We'll be visiting as many or all of the neighborhood associations. We'll have an in-person open house and maybe an online open house. So we've done this a couple times, done the road show, and try to get the word out in a concentrated way. Last one was June and July, I think, and then it's really hard for us to engage and work at the same time, so we do it one after the other. We've been working. Now it'll be time to bring what we have in January out to the public for that engagement. And then there will be the formal steps when we bring it to the council in the second quarter of the year, public hearings and all of that as well. So there will be plentiful opportunities for folks to learn more and engage on the plan. In the meantime, our Everett 2044 has comment boxes, email address. Planning Commission always accepts public comments, and we look forward to visiting some more with the council at your retreat as well, is the next step that we have with you planned, and then there will be more in the new year.
Well, I think that if you think it's appropriate, that's probably, it's probably a good stopping point, with the knowledge for certain that we'll be deeply into this in the coming year, and certainly for all those watching, we welcome your comments and suggestions and attendance at future ones of these meetings. Lori, anything from administration before we adjourn?
No, nothing.
All right.
So I have one quick question. We are coming to you at your retreat in January, and we have a small select group here, but what would you like us to focus on or add information to from what you've heard that might help your colleagues that didn't have the benefit of this conversation? Because you guys are the world experts now. And I'm sure our crash course was not sufficient, but
Well, the first thing I'm thinking about is and we can do this, flag our colleagues that this kind of stuff will be coming up in the retreat, and try, once we have that whole group together, to make the most of that very limited opportunity. So I guess probably offering some opportunity to brief them or pointing them to the resources so they can be ready, because I'll have a bunch of studying myself to do, as will the rest of us.
I know that you had said that you sent this out in email. Did it go to all council members?
It did. I will, we made a few little additions to it. I will repackage it, send it, and as well, we wanted this for the record anyway, so we'll put it on the everettwa.gov/2044, as well as I think we have agenda items on this page, so we'll get it for everybody to see.
And for people who want to look at it, those things are highly zoomable so that
Yes.
people can look at the place they know? Okay, great.
And not able to give you a great answer to your question, but I know that Council President Schwab is, I think, figuring it all out. He's right over there. So ask that guy.
I noticed he was all ears.
Yeah. All right, well, we've come to the end of our meeting. The council subcommittee is adjourned.